As an African American male born with a couple of strikes against you because of your skin color, I think it's very, very important to have some positive role models around, especially male influences. In the African American community, we struggle with a lot of health problems that have a lot to do with our diet. I do think, however, that there's a very diverse point of view in the African American community. There's a lot of different voices that need to be heard. I don't claim and pretend to know the thoughts and opinions and ideas of all African Americans. Most of all, I dislike this idea nowadays that if you're a black person in America, then you must be called African American. Listen, I've visited Africa, and I've got news for everyone, I'm not an African. What basketball expresses is what jazz expresses. Certain cultural predispositions to make art. All African American art has a substratum, or baseline, of improvisation and spontaneity. You find that in both basketball and jazz. My father is Nigerian, my mother is from Texas and African American. My father was the first in his family to go to university. He flew from Nigeria to Los Angeles in the 70s to go to UCLA, where he met my mother. They broke up before I was born, and he returned to Nigeria. Getting into the banjo and discovering that it was an African American instrument, it totally turned on its head my idea of American music, and then, through that, American history. The Firebird just symbolizes a lot for me and my career. It was one of the first really big principal roles that I was ever given an opportunity to dance with American Ballet Theatre, and it was a huge step for the African American community, I think, within the classical ballet world. We need somebody who's got the heart, the empathy, to recognize what it's like to be a young teenage mom, the empathy to understand what it's like to be poor or African American or gay or disabled or old, and that's the criterion by which I'll be selecting my judges. Forgiveness is a big part of, especially post-civil rights movement, is a big part of African American Christianity, and I wasn't raised within the Christian church, I wasn't raised within any church. I went through a soul-searching period. I went to a place that was a little bit more reflective and dark. I began to look at who I am, who I was, where I come from, what my culture is, and who I am as an African American person in America. I've had some Democrat African American leaders tell me they're really not all that comfortable with Obama as the lead at the MLK festivities, 'cause he's not down for the struggle. He does not have that in his roots. My first novel, Leaving Atlanta, took a look at my hometown in the late 1970s, when the city was terrorized by a serial murderer that left at least 29 African American children dead. Unfortunately, in television today there are very few African American characters who are human beings. They are typically two-dimensional stereotypes, cookie-cutter types. I come from an African American family that is predominantly Muslim. I have had to covertly operate in parts of the Middle East and Africa. I've lived a Muslim life and prayed in mosques, Hassaniyas, and shrines where needed. One must respect Islam to understand Islam. I've read the Quran through and through a half-dozen times. I was always drawn to gospel music and the roots of African American music. It's the foundation of rock and roll. The African American experience is one of the most important threads in the American tapestry. Fairness and equality means that what you are never limits who you can be. It means that a young African American man like my father can start a business with $500 and a dream. It means that a young African American woman like my mother can walk into European fashion houses with her head held high and be treated with respect. My mom was the first African American woman to graduate from the University of Chicago Law School in 1946. She had leadership roles in the law, in government and the corporate world. She was a great role model in that she felt anything was possible. Nowadays, people always say, how come he's doing such young shows? But they never mention the Mod Squad. I was very proud of that show. It's the first time an African American guy kissed a white girl. I was part of a hip-hop group called Fly Style. I was one of 2 white girls, and I was part of the younger company, which was called Touch of Style. And it was amazing. It gave me a different perception of dance and beauty because the other girls were mostly African American and Latina. I have never been more proud of the United States than I am this year. We have elected an African American president. We have the stellar Michelle Obama setting the standard for American women. I simply cannot say it enough. Look how far we've come. We can revolutionize the attitude of inner-city brown and black kids to learning. We need a civil rights movement within the African American community. I like ambiguity because you may be the villain in someone else's story and the hero in your own, and I think very often, African American characters are either one thing or the other. You shouldn't have to be perfectly good or perfectly bad. You don't even have to be magical. Every African American I know has two faces. There's the face that we have for ourselves and the face we put on for white America for the places we have to get to. My father is German, my mother is African American. Growing up, I visited my grandparents in Berlin a lot. I would not see any other person of color for 3 weeks. People would stare. They would say things like, "Oh, you look like chocolate, I want to eat you up." In 2008, Barack Obama had all the wind at his back, everything going for him. He was an African American at a time when the country was eager to do that. The Republicans had, in the view of many of us, pretty much disgraced themselves at home and abroad for 8 years. I grew up upper class, private school. My dad had a Jaguar. We're African American, and we work together as a family, so people assume we're like the Jacksons. But I didn't have parents using me to get out of a bad situation. You gotta understand, my great-grandfather was German and Irish. My grandmother was Indian, and my grandfather was African American, so we all got a little something in us. The Jewish culture has a wonderful thing about education. It has a great thing about family. It has a great thing about unity, hard work, dedication. I would like to say the African American community should emulate that. I have no intention of ever writing beauty tips on how to make an African American nose look slimmer or Asian eyes look bigger. That's degrading. Asian eyes are what's beautiful about you and what makes you different. I am an American, black, conservative. I don't use African American, because I'm American, I'm black and I'm conservative. I don't like people trying to label me. African American is socially acceptable for some people, but I am not some people. Here's something that's interesting. If you look at basic metrics or numbers in this country, 71% of African American men, no dad at home, no disciplinarian. Fathers are often the louder voice, the disciplinarian. Many of those kids don't grow up with a dad. I mean, the greatest athletes in the world are African American. As an African American, as a woman, I think that I've been sensitized to the way in which history privileges the white male and the way in which certain aspects of history, the things that we are taught in school, the things that are handed down, never entered the picture, though they might have been very important. You never hear about a pit bull doing anything good in the media, and they have a stigma to them, and, in many ways, pit bulls are like young African American males. Whenever you see us in the news, it's for getting shot and killed or shooting and killing somebody, for being a stereotype. I think music is one of the heroes/sheroes of the African American existence. I got my dog back. In African American language, your dog means your passion, your fire. I feel at home in a lot of places, but I am truly an African American. I think that we, as the African American men in hip-hop, we have a greater responsibility because we have the ears of so many millions of our young people, and they listen. The simple truth is that balding African American men look cool when they shave their heads, whereas balding white men look like giant thumbs. The history of African American repression in this country rose from government-sanctioned racism. Jim Crow laws were a product of bigoted state and local governments. I think the bottom of the totem pole is African American women, or women of color. I think they get the least opportunities in Hollywood. I don't necessarily believe there's a message in the fact that I'm an African American Republican. I think there is a message that America as a whole, we are now awake. We are looking at a political construct and we're fairly disappointed. I think the message is no matter where you come from in this country, there is great potential. Soul Food, another wonderful little movie that could. Here's a film that, I think our budget was maybe $6 million. We shot it in Chicago in 6 weeks. I was so proud of the film, because it showed America that an African American film about family could sell, could do well, could cross over and have true meaning. A lot of these things in this world were only a dream for Martin Luther King. Not a one-term, but a two-term African American president. And this is a terrible country? That was a dream for Martin Luther King. As an African American actor, a lot of our stories haven't been told. When I did Baby Got Back, that was just a reflection of the African American community. We've always liked curves, and a lot of people misunderstood it because let's face it, 20 years prior to Baby Got Back, the only images you saw of a black woman on television were she was probably 300 pounds and cleaning the house with a rag on her head. During the 2008 campaign, I strongly endorsed Barack Obama for president. I did so early, when many Democratic leaders, including many prominent African American politicians, believed the safe bet was to back then frontrunner Hillary Clinton. There's this little box that African American actors have to work in the first place, and I was able to rise above that box. I could have done a bunch of movies where I stayed as the Axel Foley or Reggie Hammond persona, but I didn't want to be doing the same thing all the time. Every now and then, you crash and burn, but that's part of it. Visit our website for more quotes, quoting.com.